Hi, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be learning all about reading and understanding errors. I'll show you how to not panic when you see an error message. I'll explain most of the common types of errors you'll see, and I'll give you 2 ways of solving them. So there are a few reasons why we can get errors or why they happen. The most obvious, and what you'll get about 99% of the time, are just human error, whether that be typos, incorrect syntax, logical oversights, whatever. This is just like how following a recipe in cooking, you might forget an ingredient, misread a measurement, or skip a step by accident, and suddenly your dish turns out completely wrong. Just like how a simple typo or even missing a semicolon in your code can turn out to be big mistakes in the final result. And really, all the errors in some way, shape, or form are really just human mistakes. In the example below, system.out.print a line won't work and is going to throw an error, all because we just made a typo. Another reason an error might happen is if you're trying to access something that doesn't exist. It's like looking in the fridge and trying to pull out a giraffe. You at least hopefully shouldn't expect that a giraffe would be in the fridge, yet you're trying to access it and pull it out, even if it's not there. Like in the example below, we're trying to print out the variable x, but we never defined the variable x anywhere, so it's going to throw a big error at us. Another key issue you're going to likely run into a lot is configuring your environment in the wrong way. For example, you're using features from a newer version of Java, but your project is set to an older version. You're going to get errors. We'll go more into this on another video when we talk more about your development environment, but it's really important to note that errors are normal. Every developer is going to encounter them, and I'm sure you've already encountered a few. But it's really important to know how to interpret them and how to fix them efficiently. Most errors can be small, but some of them can be really big. Imagine running a critical piece of software on a rocket ship that's meant to get you to the moon, and suddenly it comes crashing down all because you made a typo. So it's about catching these errors while you're developing, and not something the end user should have to encounter. So if you can't figure it out already, compile time errors are the errors you catch before the program is actually ran. You'll usually get these when you're compiling your code, or sometimes IntelliJ will catch them for you. You'll see some right squiggly lines like this, or Java just complaining at you. Now in Java, we usually talk about compiling our code, but this isn't exactly what Java is doing behind the scenes. And if you want, I'll make a video explaining the difference between what Java does and what compiling is. One of the errors you might encounter are syntax mistakes. Like in the example below, we're missing a semicolon after int x equals 5, and we made system lowercase. Both of these would cause our program not to run how we expected it to. Modern IntelliJs though, like IntelliJs you can see here, are going to give you a red underline that you can hover over, and it's going to tell you the error usually. Down below is an example on how to do that. It is really useful for when you're asking in the comments or on any forums, so you can give whatever error you have. Now that we talked about common compile time exceptions, let's talk about common runtime exceptions. Now runtime exceptions or errors are usually what you want to avoid, but it can give you much more accurate and detailed information under a controlled environment. Now some of these can be null pointer exceptions, arithmetic exceptions, etc. Null just means nothing. For instance, imagine you try and create a string variable but it's set to nothing, or null. Then you try and find out its length. The program doesn't know what to do since nothing has no length. Now I already hear you saying, well, why can we put null there? What's the purpose? Well, setting something at null or nothing can be great if it's used properly. Like for example in Minecraft, if they're in the loading screen, we won't be able to access the world they're in because it'll be null since they aren't actually in a world yet. This is a bit confusing and it's going to take some time to get your head around, so I think we should really go into IntelliJ and see some real examples of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a string called myString and set that to null. I'm then going to say system.out.println myString, and then below that I'm going to say myString is equal to hello world, and then again I'm going to say system.out.println myString. So if we run our current file, it says null and then hello world because string is equal to null. Now we could also really just make the string an empty string and it's just going to print out nothing, but I'm just going to make it null for now. So what we can do is we can actually null check this. So for example, we can remove all this and say if myString is equal to null, we'll say system.out.println the string is null, else system.out.println the string is not null. So if we run it, it's going to say the string is null because our string is equal to null. As you can see here from the warning, my string is equal to null is always true. So if we try and do it like the example and we do system.out.println myString.length, IntelliJ is already going to give us an error here. Method invocation length will produce a null pointer exception. But if we run this anyway, we're going to see a few things come here. We're going to say execution failed for task. We're going to see finished with non-zero exit value 1. And then if we come up here to the root of this, my first Java project, we can see the full thing. Exception in thread main cannot invoke string.length because my string is null. So we should hopefully know the reason of this. We cannot access a length of nothing. But this might look a bit daunting, so let's take it down step by step. So what we saw in IntelliJ was some pretty confusing stuff in that error. When an error happens, Java is usually going to show us a stack trace. This is a list of steps that actually led to the error. By looking at the first few lines, especially the error type and the line number, we can quickly find where the problem occurred, while still giving us in-depth information about the underlying reasons why it happened. Now sadly, I can't teach you all the ways to debug or how to do it in depth, but I can provide you the basics. So IntelliJ has a built-in debugging tool. You might have seen it near the running tool, and it can be very useful if you know how to use it right. One of the things it can do is, let's say we're coding our Minecraft client. We can use the debugging tool to run our program and change most of the things in code without having to restart Minecraft, saving us valuable time. Another thing it can do is have something called breakpoints, which will temporarily suspend your code from running until you tell it to continue. Breakpoints could also be like pause buttons for your program. They let you stop your code at certain points so you can check the values of variables and see what's happening step by step. So let's go into IntelliJ and see how we can use this debugging tool. So down here, I'm just going to go over to this debugging tool. We can also run this with Control D. So if we run this, we're going to get the same exception as we got earlier. However, if we come over to these line numbers over here, 1 to 8, it might be different for you. I'm going to set a breakpoint on line number 6. You should see a faint red circle appear on the line. So I'm just going to click on the line number 6, which is this one. You're going to see a red background here. So now if we debug our program here, we're going to see it stops at our breakpoint. Our string is equal to null here. We can see the value. And then we're going to print out the value, which is saying null. So down here, we can see the threads and variables. We're seeing the arguments, we're seeing the variables, all this. Now, this is going to look very confusing, but it's something you're just going to get over time. If we go over to the console here, we're going to see nothing, because it's paused here and it has not executed this line of code yet. So if we run it here, we're going to see we finally get the error. So let's go back into the debugging tool. Maybe let's reassign the variable. The cool thing with the debugging tool is we can actually reassign it without having to reassign it in our code yet. So we can just do it for debugging purposes. So we can click on my string null here. We can click on set value. I'm going to make the value maybe something like bananas set. And so now if we continue with it, we're gonna see 7, because that is the length of bananas, is 7 characters. So another thing we can do is, let's remove this here. Let's make a string of let's just make a string bananas is equal to bananas and string oranges is equal to oranges. So we're just gonna write a normal if statement here. If bananas dot to uppercase is equal to bananas, we'll just say system.out.println bananas equals bananas, else if oranges dot to lowercase is just equal to oranges, all lowercase. And we say system.out.println oranges equal oranges. Great. So you might be wondering, you haven't seen this yet. What is 2 uppercase and 2 lowercase? Well, this is actually just pretty simple. All it's doing is saying, okay, let's make the string of bananas all uppercase, like this. And then for oranges, let's just make it all lowercase, like this. Okay, so I'm just going to make a breakpoint at the string bananas is equal to bananas. So I'm going to make my breakpoint here and then debug our program. So we're going to see it hasn't actually been assigned yet, but down here we can do something called a step over. Now what this is going to do is it's going to go line by line. So if I step over, we're going to see the string bananas is assigned to bananas. if I step once more, string oranges, well, that's going to equal oranges. So if we keep stepping, we're going to see a few things here. We're going to see what bananas is assigned to, the oranges, all of this. So that's really all you need to know about the debugging tool. Another way you can debug here is not using the debugging tool. And this is usually what I do if I'm just debugging something quick. If something takes a while, then I'll finally use the debugging tool. But usually I'm just going to say system.out.println. I got to this point, and then maybe system.out.println, everything ran. Usually, really it's a bad habit. I use a lot of system.out.printlns to actually debug my code. However, if I'm still stuck, I'll usually just run the debugging tool and go step by step. So we're going to do one together before I give you a challenge. In this example, we have a snippet of code that has a few errors in it, and we're going to go ahead and fix it all together. If you think you can already do this, I really encourage you to pause the video and give it a try. So we can see a few issues with this. The first one being int string1 is equal to hello world. Now, a string shouldn't have the type of integer, so let's change that over to a string type. On the next line, we see double number is equal to 18.01, but we're forgetting a semicolon. So let's go ahead and fix that. And finally, we see system.out.println string1 plus number. The issue with this one is every word in system.out.println starts with an uppercase letter, which only system should. So hopefully you should feel comfortable solving errors on your own. So I'm going to put that to the test. I want you to take the code in the example below and fix it so it runs without issues and runs as expected. You can either manually type this code into intellij, or in the description you'll find a pastebin with the code that you can just copy into your editor. So what this code should do is almost be like our calculator in the last video, but way simplified. It'll take in two numbers and add them together. Simple enough, I hope. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to try and pause it and do it on your own. And when you come back, we'll go over the solution together. So I really hope you were able to get that, but now let's go over it step by step. So we're first defining our scanner. This looks good. We're then printing out, enter the first number. This looks good. Our int number 1 is equal to sc.nextInt. This is giving us a red underline. System.out.println, enter the second number. This one's also giving us a red line when we're defining number 2. A string placeholder of null, and then we're printing out the placeholder.to lowercase. We're then adding the sum of number 1 and number 2, and then we're printing out the sum and finally closing the scanner. So if we run this, it's not going to work. So let's see. Error cannot find symbol, int number 1 is equal to nextInt. Symbol method nextInt. So from this, we can gather that the problem is with the .nextInt. So let's see why this is. So the issue with this is nextInt, the second word should be uppercase since we're following the camel case conventions. Alright, let's try and run this and see what else. So error cannot find symbol, int number 2 is equal to sc.nextLint. Okay, so this is pretty simple too. Let's just say nextInt here. Alright, let's try and run it now. Okay, so let's enter our first number. Let's do 84. Our second number, let's do 60. And now we get another error. So let's go up here and see why. Exception in thread main cannot invoke string.to lowercase because placeholder is null. So we see the line number here at line 16. But I'm going to go ahead and use the debugging tool and try and figure out where exactly it is. So, alright, we're defining the scanner. Let's step. So let me enter the first number. I'll do 30. Alright, let's keep stepping. Let's enter our second number of 30, because why not? Let's step. Alright, the placeholder is null. Yep. So that's where our issue is, because that's where it's giving us the error. So let's make the placeholder, maybe I'm going to add the two together. And now if we remove the breakpoint and run it, this should work. So let's type in 60 and 10, but the sum is 50. It's not. It should be 70. Well, I hope you actually got this, because I made this number 1 minus number 2, and if we're adding it together, this should be a plus sign. So now this should work without issues. So let's do 90 and 50, and we get the sum is 140, and I'm going to add the two together. So that wraps up this video. If you have any trouble or need help with something, please don't hesitate to ask me in the comments. This video might have seemed a bit boring since we didn't actually learn anything new or make something cool, but I promise you this video is going to make your life as a developer so much easier in the future. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like and subscribe. In the next video, we're going to talk all about arrays and indexes.